Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third webinar in our series of webinars on getting the most from your third-party risk platform. I'm joined today by Emily Forbes, but just before we crack on, I'm going to share my screen and we'll kind of jump in to this webinar, which is focused on the wider ESG paradigm. And I'm going to explain a little bit what I mean by that. We've talked already about what a third-party risk management platform looks like, how to get the most out of it. We've talked about making it your own and how you can configure and customize it. We've talked about enhanced due diligence in the context of third-party due diligence and when and how and what to do with respect to ordering due diligence reports. And what I wanted to do today was kind of expand beyond where many third-party risk management programs have started. And many started in the context of anti-corruption. But increasingly, what I find with organizations I'm talking to around the world is that actually they're interested in a wider range of third-party risks. And that's particularly driven by a phrase I've used here called the ESG paradigm. I think you may have differing views on the benefits of the three-letter acronym ESG, but it is true to say that many of the organizations I'm talking to are worried about increasing legislation and regulations that speak to ESG and that are in effect prescribing to them that they need to do more due diligence, understand their supply chain more, understand their value chain more. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how you broaden out a third-party risk management program to cover these risks. I'm joined today by Emily Forbes to talk about this. Emily, do you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself and how you fit into our organization?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Hi, everyone. As Gavin said, I'm Emily Forbes, and I am the product manager for Ascent Third Party. What that basically means is I am responsible for making the platform better. I design roadmaps using customer feedback, understanding what's going on in the regulatory market, design roadmaps that deliver impact to our customers through new features and new products.
And so I guess part of that, Emily, is hearing that customer voice that says, what are you doing about addressing modern slavery risk? How are you helping me address the German Supply Chain Act? How are you helping me address the new European directive on corporate sustainability due diligence? You're kind of listening to that voice and thinking, okay, how do we build new features and adapt our processes?
Yeah, exactly. We've been hearing about these new pieces of legislation throughout 12 to 18 months. Has been a massive topic of conversation for us with existing customers and prospect customers as well.
Great. All right, so we're gonna go into this, and something to mention that I've failed to mention on the previous sessions is there isn't time on these particular webinars to take audience questions. However, if you do have questions about this or any of the previous sessions, then do submit them on this platform. We will be able to take your questions and answer them after the event. So listen, we're going to talk about how you move beyond that pure anti-corruption focus and extend to sort of broader supply chain risks. We're going to talk a little bit about what additional data might be required, and we're going to talk a bit about how you meet due diligence standards so that are increasingly broad. This is a process flow that we've shown on the previous two webinars, and I wanted to kind of start with it because what we've described is a process where when onboarding a new third party, you will conduct a risk assessment. You'll, on the basis of that, conduct some additional due diligence steps. You'll probably identify risks and you'll mitigate those and you'll get approval for the onboarding of the third party, and then you'll monitor that third party. So if our attendees listening today have that in place because, that's what they've been doing for years in the context of anti-corruption, Emily, do they need to change that to meet new requirements? Do they need to fundamentally throw that process out? Or should they actually be sitting comfortably going, yeah, I'm fine as I am?
Yeah, thankfully, you don't need to throw any of this away. The fundamentals of what you're already doing in third-party risk management, you can stay exactly the same. You've got onboarding, risk assessment, as you mentioned, taking a risk-based approach, gathering data to identify your risks, mitigating those risks, evidencing it, proving those third parties, and continuously monitoring. All of this can stay exactly the same. You just need to apply, look at it through a different lens, basically, making sure you're incorporating different data sets, screening perhaps against different data sets as well. And it might also be that you're in fact gathering the data that you need already.
Got it. So let's take that risk assessment piece. When I was talking with Claire in the first session, we talked a lot about how, for example, you would use jurisdiction as a part of your risk assessment. And people have long used things like Transparency International as a way of saying, okay, this is what I use as a proxy for jurisdictional risk. I suppose what you're saying is you need to take into consideration a broader range of risks when thinking just about that one area like jurisdiction.
Yeah, exactly. So modern slavery is a great example of a new area of risk that you need to be thinking about when it comes to jurisdiction. Risk Centre Third Party does this very well. It's incorporating a lot of different risks in that jurisdiction risk. So when you're gathering country in your kind of risk assessment phase, it's going to be looking to identify different areas of risk and producing red flags based on any additional risks it's identified. And it will actually gather all this information, put it into a single task. So you're not even getting additional work or kind of admin through this. It's telling you, okay, we've identified jurisdiction risk. And in this case, it might be modern slavery and corruption. As you mentioned, Transparency International is something that we use, and companies will have been using it for a long time. And we've also incorporated a walk-free modern slavery index into our CTP. So customers are getting a more holistic country risk picture, which if you don't use technology is very complicated. If you're having to kind of maintain all of these different indexes, analyze these different indexes, bring them together, that's a lot of work and a lot of maintenance. Working with a technology partner like Dow Jones is a way to make your lives a lot easier. We've identified and created our own risk algorithm around jurisdiction risk, which makes everybody's lives easier and produces a single picture, as I said, of what the jurisdiction risk is for a third party.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? That, and that someone like me who's sort of been focusing on this for quite a while, and many of the people in the audience will have been focusing on third-party due diligence for a long time. And what you're saying now is actually our jurisdiction risk is a combination of risk factors. We're no longer just focusing on that one index, which is a pretty blunt instrument. We're actually taking a combination of indexes, bringing them together. And so, and if there is a modern slavery risk, that's going to be highlighted by the platform.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you're entering a country into your questionnaires, and if it identifies risk, it's going to flag that up and it's going to tell you exactly what risk it's identified. So it'll say, we've identified corruption risk because of this Transparency International index, and we've identified modern slavery risk due to the walk-free index. Please do some additional due diligence.
Right. Yeah, so it's going to prompt you to do stuff. And I think, the interesting thing for me when I talk with clients about jurisdictional risk is it very quickly moves on to a conversation also about sector and product risk. So here's a list from Walk Free. Now, am I right in thinking that what we've done is we've sort of brought this in so that now there's a new area of risk that we're allowing our customers to address, which is to say something around product?
Yeah, exactly. If product risk is something that's relevant to your business, then it needs to be incorporated into your third-party risk processes. What we've done is we've used walk-free data to kind of capture the highest risk products in regards to modern slavery. We've incorporated that into our existing risk assessment and external questionnaires as well. So users will be presented with this information and they can tell the system, okay, there are carpets involved in this third-party relationship. And then what it will do is it will again flag risks to the user. The important thing to remember with this product risk is that it does go hand in hand with jurisdiction as well.
Yeah.
So within the red flag, it will tell the user to make that connection between the source country and the product. So this in itself, these products in themselves don't automatically mean there is heightened risk of modern slavery. They need to also be doing that additional due diligence to understand where these products are coming from.
Yeah. And I mean, it is interesting, this, because we were already capturing, as part of that standard process, we were already asking the business unit to describe what are the services that the third party is delivering. And that's a really standard part of any anti-corruption process. What are the services that this third party is involved in or delivering for our company? So coming back to your earlier point of, we don't need to throw any of those building blocks out. Actually, most of our clients were already kind of asking this question. What we've done, I suppose, is just make it a bit more explicit and give them the data point to say, yes, this is a potential area of risk.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's audited for them as well in the platform, and they can audit the kind of mitigating actions they've taken and the additional due diligence that they've done.
Right. So I'm sort of reticent to share this slide because what this is a outline of the SASB framework. And I know many organizations use the SASB framework, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Many use that as a framework for understanding their ESG position. Others use different standards, so forgive me if you don't use SASB, but I thought this was useful to show because when you are broadening out your third-party risk platform, you're going to be already covering sanctions, for example. You're going to be already covering some core anti-corruption data. You're going to be covering maybe politically exposed persons or state-owned companies, for example. I guess a question that I would have for the audience is, how confident are you that your data set that you're screening against around adverse media adapts to and is broad enough to address ESG issues like the German Supply Chain Act, for example, expects you to, like the forthcoming, well, not the forthcoming, the EU directive is now through the EU Parliament, but obviously yet to make it through international legislation. But those pieces of legislation describe how you need to identify adverse issues relating to environmental factors, relating to social factors, labor issues, and so on, more broad than just, for example, modern slavery. So this SASB framework, I think, is a useful tool for you to use in asking the question of your third-party risk management platform provider. That was a long sentence, long phrase. But your provider should be able to say, yes, our data covers this. So, Emily, obviously from a Dow Jones perspective, we're very confident of how our data does address, the vast majority of these issues. And I think just thinking about how that arrives in someone's platform, can you talk me through how sort of adverse media issues that relate to ESG issues would be picked up in the risk and third-party platform?
Yeah, so as you said, we have amazing adverse media data here at Dow Jones, and that's fully integrated into risk and third party. So if customers have enabled that risk category of adverse media in their screening settings, They can also enable risk mitigation tasks or red flags associated with that risk as well. It also allows you to kind of delve a little bit deeper into adverse media. So if you were actually just concerned about environmental issues, you can kind of filter your screening down to just those risk factors as well. So if you've got all those settings enabled, when you're putting in your third-party name or any associated persons or entities, it's automatically screening the Dow Jones database for those risks. And what you can see at the top there is an example of a third party that has been screened and some risks have been identified. You can see in the yellow there, that's an adverse media tag. So there are some adverse media risks that need to be mitigated and reviewed. So once the customer has kind of looked into that, identified if there are false positives or if it's a confirmed match and it's the third party you're working with, the system is then reading the risk categories associated with that profile and automatically producing red flags. And what you can see at the bottom there is an example of an adverse media red flag. So there will be teams out there who are set up to receive those red flags automatically, and they will receive an email notification. They can click through the red flag and understand, okay, what adverse media risks have been identified, and the profile will list exactly which subcategories those are, whether that be environmental impacts or human rights, workplace issues, that kind of thing.
So our data has those categories of that allow you to see very quickly what type of ESG, which is a very, very broad range of risks, where it sits within that. So if it's an environmental issue, it's got that label, it says it's environmental, and you can really drill into that.
Yeah, exactly. And within the profile as well, any kind of particular adverse media articles are tagged. So if there are a lot of adverse media, if there's a lot of history there, even against each category, each article is telling you exactly what category of risk.
It's funny because I often joke, we've had a category of our data called adverse media for about a decade now. In fact, it may be over a decade. And we've been creating this fantastic database that's been helping customers, particularly around anti-corruption. But I think we kind of hadn't spotted that we actually created a ESG data set 10 years ago. we didn't call it that. And I sometimes joke that we should rename our adverse media data as an ESG data set. But I think, it comes back to what you were saying again at the beginning, Emily, that if you've got a process in place that is already screening and monitoring your supply chain, your third parties against a really robust data set, then you may have a pretty high level of confidence that you're already covering a huge amount of what needs to be covered under these new legislation. So I think one of the messages I try to give when I'm talking with clients is one of reassurance in a way, because if you're using one of our platforms, if you're using our data, you are already assessing against a really wide range of ESG risks. Maybe we should rename it and just put a little sticker on it saying ESG data. All right. So we talked about the process, that in effect, the same process, that risk assessment, that those due diligence steps, the looking at the risks that you've identified and mitigating them, the monitoring, these are all the same building blocks that exist within a human rights due diligence program, as would exist in a anti-corruption program. And just one point on that, actually, I talked about risk assessment. I think it's really important here for us to give our point of view around what risk assessment means in the context of a third-party due diligence program. So when the phrase risk assessment is used in legislation or in guidance, it's sometimes used somewhat loosely, and it can apply to two very distinct and separate activities. Activity one is a whole company, sometimes annual, sometimes less frequent, but German Supply Chain Act, I think, says you need to do it at least annually. But it's a whole company review of where are our risks across our value chain. Okay, so that's a very large activity with multiple stakeholders that says holistically, where are our modern slavery risks, for example? Where are our wider human rights risks? Where are our environmental risks? That process is different to a risk assessment that you do when you onboard a specific third party. So when you onboard that specific third party, you've already conducted the broader risk assessment as a business, and you know that third parties that you onboard from jurisdiction A, B, C, or D are high risk, whilst jurisdictions X, Y, Z are lower risk. And you might have formalized that in your policies. So do remember, when you're thinking of that phrase risk assessment, think of two different activities. One, the whole company risk assessment, and two, when you're onboarding a specific third party, risk assessing that specific third party against the broader risk assessment. So I just wanted to make that point. Moving on though, you mentioned, Emily, about the questionnaires that exist within Resend a Third Party. And I know that we've had a lot of feedback from our clients about different questions that should be added to make sure it covers a broader range of risk. Can you walk us through some of those areas that people have been talking to us about?
Yeah, certainly. So modern slavery is obviously a big topic of conversation and something that customers have been asking us about for a while. We have had modern slavery risks in our questionnaires for quite some time now, but we've expanded them recently in line with the new regulations that are coming out and will come out in the future. So, for example, in regards to modern slavery, it's important to make sure that not only are you kind of monitoring risks, as we talked about with the adverse media, but you're ensuring that your third parties have their own modern slavery policies, because it's important that you're setting up your processes, but also they are setting up their processes as well to ensure that they're mitigating risk, they're identifying risk, and they're preventing risk. So these questions on modern slavery are some examples of what you can incorporate into your questionnaire. So understanding if they have a policy for prevention of modern slavery, understanding what actions they're taking, do they have a hotline, do they do risk assessments, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also, have they ever identified an incident or risk of modern slavery?
And it's interesting that last one is interesting, because that's almost a direct mirror of a question that's often asked around corruption, bribery and corruption. And it's just, I think this is, again, reassuring our audience. If you've got a program in place that is effective around anti-corruption, you've got all of the building blocks for a program around other issues as well. Environmental issues. Do people talk to us about that as well?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely. That's another kind of encompassed question we get. What are you doing about ESG? Do you cover environmental impacts in the questionnaires? And so these are some examples of what we've introduced. So again, it's centered around that kind of policy. You're wanting to make sure that your third parties have their own policies and are aware of the impact they have on the environment. So these two questions focus on policy, and also, is the third party currently producing reports? Data and reporting is a massive part of these new pieces of legislation. Your supply chain needs to make sure they can provide you with the data that you need. So if they're already producing those reports, that's a good indication that they are set up themselves to provide you with the data that you need.
Yeah. And then lastly, the sort of, flow down of through your entire supply chain. I guess people are using questionnaires to help with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So fourth party risk or supply chain risk is something that we have expanded into our questionnaires. And it's, again, just kind of centered around making sure that your third parties have the same kind of values and processes that you have. If you don't ensure that your third parties have those values, it's not going to help, because you having them on your own is not enough. You need to make sure that your entire kind of supply chain is also working towards the same kind of steps that you are. So does your third party have a code of conduct that they apply to their own third parties, and do they have their own third party due diligence program? Is a good indication of how much they are paying attention and how much they're caring about what's going on in their supply chain.
Great. Okay, so yeah, and I mean, when we did the first session with Claire McMillan, obviously we talked about how our clients can write their own questions into these questionnaires and adapt them. They can also score them and associate risks with them. So when you are thinking about what questions you're asking your third party, do think about, how you use that information, whether you want it to go towards assessing risk, whether you want it to create an action for you. I sometimes worry that organizations create too many data points for themselves and create too many actions. But I think in this context, being able to determine what you've done to ask that question about modern slavery and how you've dealt with the answer, I think is, obviously required across a whole range of, I've talked about the German Supply Chain Act, talked about the EU directive. You've got modern slavery acts in Australia, you've got new legislation in Canada, obviously in the UK, and very, very significant legislation in the US, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. So these all dictate that you must be asking those questions and you must be gathering data. Emily, you talked a bit about reporting and how important that was. It strikes me that having all of this information in a platform means you can also demonstrate for your own regulatory reporting what you've done and how you've done it.
Yeah, exactly. The Risenta third party is very good with its reporting. It basically gives you access to every single data point that you're gathering. So you can extract that data. You can create reports specific to the modern slavery questions you have, the environmental related questions that you have, and extract those reports for all the reporting you need to do. It's a good way to monitor if you've got programs to work with your supply chain to kind of improve. Say you're wanting to aim for 80% of your third parties to have their own third party code of conduct. You can use this reporting to monitor over time how many yeses you're getting to that question.
Yeah. So you're gonna really drill into that data to analyze it on a macro level to say where are our risks, and that then can feed back into that annual risk assessment that you're doing. Listen, we've run out of time, which is awful, because I could talk for a lot longer about this, and there's so much to say. I think it's just really important to reiterate at the end here that if you've got an effective third-party risk management process that has been established in the context, for example, of the FCPA or Loi Sapin, or acts, anti-corruption acts around the world, you've almost certainly got the building blocks for a broader ESG-related third-party program. Platforms like ours, and as I said at the start of this, others are available, and there's loads of platforms out there. They should be able to adapt and expand and pivot to these new risks. You need to think about the data that sits behind them. You need to keep taking that risk-based approach to help you focus on the areas of highest risk. And I just really encourage you all to engage with your providers, and if that's us, engage with us to to ask how can they adapt to this broader range of risks. That's it from me and from Emily, and we're going to have to go now, but do contact us if you've got further questions. Thanks so much.